You are asleep when the sky begins to change. Not a storm, not a season, something bigger than either. For weeks, ash has been falling so fine you barely notice it, coating leaves, settling on water, turning the air faintly gritty when you breathe. 74,000 years ago, this was not a hypothetical. This was the aftermath of the largest volcanic eruption our species has ever lived through. This is the story of how your ancestors survived the end of the world, or at least, what looked like it. Here is what actually happened. On the island now called Sumatra, a volcano erupted with a force so extreme it is still used as the reference point for the largest eruptions geologists study. Roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and rock were thrown into the sky, enough material to bury an area the size of Texas under a meter of debris. The blast carved out a crater 62 miles long. That crater is a lake today. Sunlight dimmed across the planet for years. Global temperatures may have dropped by several degrees, and in some models, far more than that near the eruption itself. Some studies have also pointed to a temporary thinning of the ozone layer in the tropics following the eruption, which would have meant more damaging ultraviolet light reaching the surface at exactly the moment food supplies were already under strain. Acid rain, produced as volcanic gases mixed with atmospheric moisture, may have further stressed lakes, rivers, and the plants that depended on them. It is a genuinely frightening combination of pressures, layered on top of each other, all at once. For a long time, scientists believed this single event nearly ended human history. The idea is called the Toba catastrophe hypothesis, first proposed by geologist Stanley Ambrose in the 1990s. His argument was straightforward and genuinely alarming. Genetic studies around that time showed that living humans carry surprisingly little genetic diversity for a species our size, as if, at some point, our population had been squeezed down to a small number of survivors. Ambrose connected that genetic bottleneck to Toba. A years-long volcanic winter, he argued, could have collapsed food supplies worldwide and reduced humanity to as few as a few thousand people, clinging on in isolated pockets. It is a vivid image. Our entire species, narrowed down to a handful of survivors, scattered across a darkened planet, and for 2 decades, that was the story told in textbooks and documentaries. It made intuitive sense, too. An eruption 10,000 times larger than Mount St. Helens sounds like exactly the kind of event that should end a species, not just inconvenience one. Here is where it gets interesting, because the archaeological record tells a very different story, and the evidence for that has only gotten stronger in just the last year. Researchers can now trace this eruption with remarkable precision using something called cryptotephra, microscopic shards of volcanic glass invisible to the naked eye, but chemically unique to a single eruption, like a fingerprint scattered across a continent. Geoarchaeologist Jade Herniak and colleagues have used this method to locate the exact moment of the Toba eruption inside the layered soil of archaeological sites thousands of miles away, in Africa, where no visible ash ever fell. And what they found was not collapse. At Pinnacle Point, a site on the southern coast of South Africa, layers dated before, during, and after the eruption all show continuous human occupation. People did not vanish from this coastline. If anything, activity appears to have increased in the period afterward, alongside new innovations in stone tool technology. This is the detail that gets me every time. The place on Earth where you would expect total devastation instead shows a community adapting, inventing, and continuing to live, nearly 6,000 miles away, at a site called Shinfa Medama in the lowlands of Ethiopia. Researchers found the same signature of Toba ash preserved in layers that also contain clear evidence of human settlement. People there appear to have shifted their strategy to survive a harsher, drier landscape, following seasonal rivers and fishing from shrinking waterholes when larger prey became scarce. That shift matters more than it might sound. It means these communities were not simply enduring the same routine under worse conditions. They were actively redesigning what counted as a viable way to find food, moving towards smaller, more predictable resources when the larger, riskier ones became unreliable. Some researchers have also pointed to the bow and arrow as a technology that may have proven especially useful for exactly this kind of unpredictable, resource-scarce environment. though its exact origins remain debated among archaeologists. None of this means Toba was harmless. It almost certainly was not. Near the eruption itself, in what is now Indonesia and the surrounding region, the impact would have been catastrophic for any living thing caught nearby. And the climate disruption was real and global and lasted for years, not days. But catastrophic does not mean the same thing everywhere. Distance, geography, and the particular resources a community relied on all shaped how survivable this event actually was. So let's reconstruct what a single day might have looked like for a small group on that South African coastline, somewhere in the years after the eruption. You wake before the sun, because the tide dictates your schedule far more than daylight does. The sky above you is not the sky your grandparents described. Thinner sunlight, a faint gray haze some mornings that never fully burns off. You walk down toward the rocks while the tide is still low. This is where a meaningful portion of your group's protein comes from. Not from chasing large game across open plains, but from something far less glamorous and far more reliable. Shellfish, gathered patiently from the same stretch of coast, day after day, season after season. Archaeologists studying this exact region have found enormous shell middens, thick layers of discarded muscle, and limpet shells built up over generations, showing just how central this coastal foraging strategy really was. The shells alone can tell researchers a surprising amount. The season they were gathered in, the size of the animals taken, even how intensively a particular stretch of coast was being used year after year. That kind of detailed record is part of what makes this site so valuable. It is not just a single snapshot, but a layered diary of daily decisions stretching across thousands of years. Beside you, someone is shaping a small stone point, using a technique called pressure flaking, pressing a tool of bone or antler against the edge of a stone to remove tiny, precise flakes rather than striking it with force. It is slow work. It is also part of a new wave of technological refinement that shows up in the archaeological layers right around this period. Smaller, more controlled tools, built for accuracy rather than brute impact. Why would people be inventing new tools during what should have been the hardest years of their lives? This is the counterintuitive twist that the research keeps circling back to. Hardship, in this specific case, does not appear to have broken this community's ability to adapt. If anything, constrained resources may have rewarded groups who could innovate quickly, refine their tools, diversify what counted as food, and stay flexible about where and how they found it. Researchers are still split on how directly to connect these tool innovations to the eruption itself, since dating this precisely is genuinely difficult, and correlation is not the same as causation. But the pattern is consistent enough across multiple sites that it is hard to ignore. Meanwhile, geneticists have continued to find that population bottleneck in the human genome, a real and measurable reduction in diversity, somewhere in the deep past. The honest answer researchers give today is more complicated than either extreme. The bottleneck is real, but the archaeological and genetic timelines do not line up cleanly enough to say Toba alone caused it, or that Toba caused nothing at all. Some studies suggest the population decline may have started before the eruption, driven by climate shifts already underway, with Toba arriving as one more pressure layered on top of an already difficult period, rather than a single sudden apocalypse. This is genuinely still being debated, and any documentary that tells you otherwise is oversimplifying a messy, ongoing scientific conversation. What we can say with real confidence is this: human beings did not survive the largest volcanic event in 2.5 million years through luck alone. They survived through variation. Some groups closer to the disaster, some farther away, some near reliable coastlines, some following rivers inland. And through behavioral flexibility, the willingness to change strategy when the old one stopped working. That is not a small thing. It is, arguably, one of the deepest patterns in our entire species. The ability to look at a landscape that has stopped cooperating and find another way to live in it. Think about what that actually required. No weather forecasts, no stored grain reserves, no global supply chains to fall back on when the immediate environment failed. Just observation, memory passed between generations, and a willingness to try something the previous generation had not needed to try. Here is the honest modern mirror, without pretending the comparison is tidier than it is. We do not face volcanic winters the way that community on the South African coast did, but we face our own versions of sudden, disruptive change and the instinct that helped people adapt back then, staying flexible, diversifying rather than depending on one fragile source, paying close attention to what is actually happening around you rather than what you expected to happen, is not an ancient relic. It shows up in how modern communities respond to crop failures, supply shortages, and unexpected disasters today. The tools are different. The underlying behavior is strikingly similar. Consider how differently two households handle a sudden shock, a job loss, a shortage, a season that simply does not go as planned. One keeps doing exactly what it always did and hopes conditions improve on their own. The other starts paying closer attention, adjusts, tries a new approach, and treats the disruption as information rather than as pure misfortune. The archaeological record along that South African coastline looks, in its own way, like the second household, scaled up across generations. None of this is meant to suggest that resilience made hardship painless, or that every group, facing Toba's aftermath, simply thrived. Some almost certainly did not. The archaeological record we have is necessarily partial, built from the sites that happen to preserve evidence, and happen to get excavated, which means the full picture of who struggled and who adapted is still being filled in, one cryptotephra sample at a time. What the evidence increasingly shows is that survival was not a single dramatic act of heroism. It was thousands of small, unglamorous choices: where to dig for shellfish, how to shape a stone tool a little more precisely, whether to follow the river inland or stay along the coast, repeated by ordinary people who had no idea they were living through what we now consider one of the most extreme environmental events in human history. You were asleep when the sky began to change. And somewhere on a quiet coastline, 74,000 years ago, so was someone whose choices the next morning, however small, are part of the reason any of us are here to tell this story at all.